So thank you very much for joining us for Series 5 Talk 2. And may I introduce to you our special guest this afternoon, Chris Wilson from Circles Southeast. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Hopefully it'll be an informative half hour in terms of the work that Circles of Support and Accountability does. Just a little bit about myself. I am a qualified social worker, was engaged in child protection, youth justice, and then jumped ship to probation, worked for probation, and was fortunate in that I was able to kind of get a job in the Thames Valley Treatment and Assessment Centre for sexual offending, which developed the Thames Valley Sex Offender Community Group Work Programme. And then from there, I kind of went on to manage the pilot, Thames Valley pilot project for Circles of Support and Accountability, which I hesitantly say was 22 years ago. And over that period, I've seen Circles grow, and we are now at a point where the Ministry of Justice have commissioned nationally Circles because of its effectiveness. So I'm here to tell you what it is I do and how it works. So if I could have the first slide, Jamie.
Yep. No
Circles began in the 90s in Canada with the Mennonite community, who have a long history in restorative justice. And make no mistake, Circles of Support and Accountability is a restorative mechanism for delivering a type of restorative justice. The Mennonites have a long history, as I say, in restorative justice, and were engaged in use of restorative justice in the field of sexual violence long before we in the UK ever thought that to be appropriate. And of course, there will still be some people I know who don't think the use of restorative justice is appropriate in sexual violence. Personally, I think it is appropriate, and I hope that by the end of this presentation, I will have convinced you as to why it is. So Circles of Support and Accountability is basically where the community come together, managed by an experienced and qualified criminal justice worker, to provide a network of support and monitoring around a high-risk sex offender who has been released from prison back into the community. I am a great believer in getting your evidence from wherever you can. And I recall when being trained to work in the field of sexual violence in assessment and treatment, one of the clear messages was that if your gut reaction is telling you something, listen to it, because that is very important. So if I could have the next slide, Jamie. I've just got these couple of quotes, one from literature, which is The Enchanted April, which I believe has been turned into a film. Some of you may have read the book, some of you may have seen the film. But actually for me, when I read this, it spoke to me in terms of my own work, in that justice often seems to be vengeance. And of course, we all know that our justice system is, and the Western justice system is retribution. It is a system whereby if you offend, you are offending against the state, and the state will try you and punish you. But actually, if we want to change something, we have to look at alternative models. And actually, care, humanity, and love seem to me to be at the very heart of what we're trying to do. And I will explain that more in a bit. The other quote is from Hannah Arendt, who was a German Jew, and much of her work was focused on the atrocities and crimes of the Nazis. And she was actually a big proponent of restorative justice, and took the view, as is written here, that without being forgiven or released from the consequences of what people have done, our capacity to act would be confined to one single deed. I think for me, this quote actually embodies the kind of truth that we should all hold dear, which is actually, you know, a person is more than the sum of their offending behavior. You know, a crime is committed, but people are not defined by that crime. And of course, all of us working in the criminal justice system would adhere to that. I think emotional truth is something that we need to think about, because literature is full of emotional truth. Our gut reactions are full of kind of telling us what we emotionally feel to be true. And actually, for me, the evidence of that is that Toni Morrison's Beloved, what a great book that is, was made a key text for social work courses when social work became a degree. So could I have the next slide, Jamie, please? So what is restorative justice? Restorative justice actually involves every component of the people who have been hurt and are involved in the crime, i.e. the victim, the victim's family, the victim's friend, the offender, the offender's family, the offender's friends, and also the community. And that's why Circles uses the community to great effect, because the community are so important. The community have to take responsibility for the protection of its individual members. Now, restorative justice, often people see it as a victim offender mediation, and that's how they define restorative justice. Restorative justice actually is much, much more than that. Restorative justice is a mindset, and I kind of often think you could set up a political party and run for parliament on the ticket of restorative justice, because it's a way of life. And to illustrate what I mean, I would like to quote Quinney, who in 1991, another restorative justice academic, who stated, "To eliminate crime, to end the construction and perpetuation of crime, an existence that makes crime possible requires a transformation of our very human being. When our hearts are filled with love and our minds with willingness to serve, we will know what has to be done and how it has to be done." And that kind of encapsulates restorative justice. Restorative justice is about repair. It's about stakeholder participation, i.e., as I say, everybody who's been involved in it. And it's about transformation, transforming lives, transforming in the way that Quinney has quoted. The processes in which we get to that transformation are truth-telling, validation of the individual, respect for the individual, trust, mutual care, and most importantly, accountability. Because when a crime's been committed without truth and without accountability, we have nothing. The mechanisms for delivering that transformation are things like restorative conferencing, restorative mediation, those kind of things that people automatically think of when they're thinking restorative justice. Sentencing circles in Canada, where they're really big on restorative justice, circuit judges go round into communities and they hold the courts in the community, in which the community can attend and participate, in which everybody who has been affected by the crime has a voice. Community activism, that is essentially restorative, and I like to use the example of the pulling down of the statue in Bristol of Colston, the slave trader. You know, that a lot of people saw that as criminal damage, but actually wasn't that the community taking responsibility and taking action to try and somehow make equality and righting the wrongs of the evils of slavery? I pose it as a question, but personally, I think it probably is. So for the victim, it's about restoring power. Sorry, it is about restoring power, property loss, a sense of dignity, a sense of empowerment, and the need for social support. That first one for the victim, that first identification of what restorative values were, was by John Braithwaite, again an Australian academic and who specialised in restorative justice. And I think it's worth saying that actually Braithwaite said something that I find very profound, which is there can be no justice without equality. And I think that's really important. And the example he uses is that if a mother steals a loaf of bread to feed her child, then there can be no justice, because the crime is one of poverty and the causes of poverty. And again, that for me really resonates in terms of what we're trying to do with restorative justice. For the offender, I mean, everybody who works in the criminal justice system, I'm sure, is there because their values are such that they want to restore dignity. That's through a sense of shame. Offenders feel shame, and there are different types of shame, and shame can be very destructive, and shame can be very, very facilitative. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in relation to circles in a minute. They need a support network. They need to feel validated. They need to feel part of a community. They need to understand the implications and consequences of their actions, and they need to take accountability, responsibility to make amends. That is true accountability. And for the community, it's to restore peace and safety, to meet the needs of everyone. And to go back to what Braithwaite said about equality, values to support non-domination. Where one person has power over the other, you cannot have justice. Could I have the next slide, Jamie, please? Okay, so this is what circles of support and accountability is based on. It is a strength-based approach, and way back, we wanted to be able to evidence to our statutory partners that circles works, and to do that, we needed to show that we were on top of whether risk in a circle from the person convicted of a sexual offence who was part of a circle, whether their risk was raised or whether their risk was being reduced. And Andrew Bates, a psychologist, developed a tool called the dynamic risk review, and that was used for a 10-year period. And both he and Nadia Wager, Professor Nadia Wager from Middlesbrough or Teesside University, evaluated that over a 10-year period and found that actually volunteers were predicting correctly when somebody's risk was raised or somebody's risk was reduced, and that fitted with the kind of probation assessments, etc. Circles is based on the Good Lives model. It's about actually identifying the strengths of the individual, that a person is not defined by their offence. And actually, in the field of sexual violence, the perpetrators of sexual violence, you know, that is really important, because there is no other group within the criminal justice system of offenders who are othered in the way that sexual offenders are. Desistance theory, you know, the theory that people grow out of offending, the theory that actually circumstances can change that makes it not worth a person offending. And again, desistance theory is a very important theory and central to the work of circles. And I have to say, Fergus McNeill, who is the author of desistance theory, is a great advocate of circles and certainly kind of promotes it whenever he can. And of course, that investment in social, cultural and economic capital that has been around since the 1960s. You know, this is not new theory. This is not rocket science. You know, we kind of, if you treat a person with respect, they are likely to show you respect. So that's what circles is based upon. Could I have the next slide, Jamie, please? So when we set up Circles, Rebecca Saunders, who's the current chief executive of Circles South East, and I said, you know, actually any practice that is meaningful has to be related to the statutory services. Police and probation and MAPA have to have an investment in Circles, otherwise it remains kind of a nice to have rather than proving that it is an essential kind of part of risk management. And what we did was we came up with the 3 pillars, and these 3 pillars represent the 3 models of our criminal justice system, or of criminal justice. The support is a restorative justice model. The monitor is the retributive model that our Western civilizations adopt, and the maintenance is actually the model used by probation of rehabilitation. It's the model of rehabilitation. And there is a difference between the restorative model and the rehabilitative model, in that actually what you're doing in the restorative model is trying to change the environs for the person to flourish, whereas in truth, the rehabilitative model says, you have done something wrong, it is you that needs to change, so we're going to rehabilitate you. However, all models have validity, and all models we need to acknowledge and to work within. So we came up with this theoretical framework to embody the work of Circles. And I won't read it because you can read it yourselves, but suffice to say that when in 2003 MAPA had just been instigated, and I was quite taken aback at how open arms MAPA were to the very concept of Circles. I found myself in the very early days of that project, pilot project management, traveling to MAPA conferences across the country, talking about what we were trying to do with Circles, because MAPA, which essentially is about risk management, and risk management tends to be risk averse, what Circles did was offer MAPA the alternative of positive risk management and using the community for risk management, which they really embraced. And I have to say, it worked. And what I like about this theoretical framework is that actually it still is as appropriate today as it ever has been. Could I have the next slide, please, Jamie? So I talked about shame. Shame is important, and actually Braithwaite wrote a criminal text called Crime Reintegration and Shaming, which is still as relevant today as it was when it was published in the 1980s. But this essentially is discriminative shaming. What you're looking at is a person called John Robert Lee, who lives in Texas and is a person convicted of sexual offence. He has this on his house. He has this sticker on his car. You won't be surprised, I guess, to know that actually compliance with community notification in Texas is about 40%, which means 60% of those that come out of prison of Texas residents go to ground. They disappear. They're unable to be managed. And actually, I think somewhere like, I may have the state wrong, but it's another southern state where it's even lower. It's 36%. And this is actually, you know, this is the example of defining the person by their crime. And actually, Tim Hartford, a Financial Times journalist, at the time we were looking in this country in the 90s to introduce community notification, did a study where he found out that kind of, no surprise, but millions of pounds were wiped off the property market in the States when one of these signs went up. I mean, you know, seriously, would you buy a house next door to a sign like that? I don't think many people would. However, the alternative is reintegrative shaming. Next slide, please, Jamie. Reintegrative shaming is a process sanctioned by the criminal justice system to strengthen the moral correction between the offender and the community. And here you have an example of a circle. A circle lasts for, well, officially, under the MOJ contracts, because the MOJ are paying for them, they last for about 18 months. And even those 18 months, you can achieve a lot. My kind of my measure of success of a circle is that if somebody comes into a circle and after 18 months they are as dependent on their circle members as they were 18 months ago, then you have to question whether the circle's been successful. However, if at the end of 18 months they are in their own networks of the community, supported by other networks, people who also know but are discreet, and are engaged in life-affirming kind of activity and positive activity, then the circle has been a success. That having been said, the first circle in Canada lasted 13 years, and Charlie Taylor, the first core member, died while still in his circle. And actually, one of the very early circles we set up in Thames Valley, the person convicted of the sexual offence, the core member, to use circle parlance, that circle lasted in some kind of form. I mean, it was reconstituted many times, but for 7 years, because actually that person needed that constant monitoring. So that's how a circle works. Just thinking about kind of the disintegrative shaming, some of you may have noticed that underneath the photograph, I actually put a Chris Christopherson quote, which I believe comes from the Ballad of Me and Bobby McGee. I personally love Janis Joplin's kind of version of that, but freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And I'm just highlighting that because actually I think that's so appropriate for Robert John Lee and anybody in his situation who's coming out of prison and having to deal with that kind of thing. And it also goes back to what I was saying earlier about exempling how emotional truth is important, you know, kind of in popular culture, in songs and in literature. You know, ignore it at your peril is my advice. So this is kind of three key principles as to why restorative justice is applicable to CoSA. The principle of repair, it requires, and what we do is we heal victims, offenders and communities. And I think it's important to say that right at the beginning, survivors of sexual violence were volunteering for circles. And I always kind of knew before I was sat down day one at my desk on this issue that actually some people who are engaged with charitable endeavours tend to do it if they have a personal investment. I don't think I quite realised the extent that this would play out in circles. Very quickly, after about 3 years, we realised that our kind of volunteer population was running at about, who were survivors, was running at about 20%. I've actually done a specific piece of research around that, and I think it's higher. I would say that it's about 30%. And actually, I think what's important to remember, two things really, is firstly, you know, by the time a survivor comes to circles to volunteer, they have resilience like no other. And actually somebody in a circle a volunteer who hasn't experienced sexual violence will pathologize the survivor volunteer, going, oh, it's so bad it will have permanently damaged them. You know, make no mistake, the crime of sexual violence is abhorrent, it's appalling, and it messes with the very core of the person. That's what makes it a different kind of crime. That's what makes it unacceptable. But actually, you know, people do survive. They recover. They become resilient. And actually, our survivors working in circles do an incredible job and are often more resilient than the non-survivor volunteer. And you know, I think again, the use of survivors in circles is really, really important. Julia Harman, an academic, did a major study in this area and concluded that actually Harman 1985 is the reference, but she concluded that you know, survivors, victims of sexual violence did not want revenge. What they wanted was the condemnation of what had, by society, as to what had happened to them, and actually, you know, to ensure that it doesn't ever happen to anybody else. And that gave me a real insight into why survivors would come forward and volunteer for circles. Stakeholder participation. We give the opportunity for communities to take responsibility, to be involved in the risk management of people who live in their community. And as I was saying earlier, the principle of transformation in community and government roles and relationships. And this is really, really important because, you know, you cannot expect police or probation or the criminal justice system and those of us that work in that system to be able to solve all the ills of society. Society has to take responsibility for itself. Could I have the next slide? Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of minutes left, Chris. Just
yeah,
to,
we are open
for
referrals. We, as I say, we're now funded by the Ministry of Justice. I mean, I have. I'm managing Kent, Surrey and Sussex in Circle South East area. We have a monthly referral panel, as all our areas do, which is chaired by Probation, and they identify those that meet the criteria on their officers' caseloads, and officers are probation officers still officers? No, I'm not sure. On persons who work in probation on their caseload, and the referral form for circles is on Endelius, and it can be accessed through there. The criteria, it's their OPS score, medium to high, and a 1 to 2 isolation score. We deliver a lot of other services. We have contracts with Hampshire, Thames Valley, and Surrey Office of and Crime Commissioner's Office. We do direct work with Thames Valley Police. We are engaged in a partnership with Thames Valley Police and Surrey Police on their violence against women and girls agenda and their work, Operation Vigilant. We have a project in Kent, Surrey and Sussex that I manage called ENZO, which is part of the ODP pathway for those with very complex needs, and we use a paired mentoring system. Every piece of work that Circle South East does is based in community and use of community, and that's our mantra. And at that point, I think I'll say thank you very much. There's my email should you want to contact me. Can I just say that email's incorrect? It's Chris.Wilson. Apologies for that. So stick a dot between Chris and Wilson if you want to contact me. But I welcome anybody kind of who wants to know more, make a referral, or equally would like the PowerPoint presentation. I said to yesterday's POP audience that actually I do have a longer presentation, which I'm happy to send as well, on this subject of restorative justice practice within a risk management framework. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And before I invite any questions, I'd just like to say on our behalf, you speak with such passion, such knowledge and intelligence, and some of the points that you've looked at in terms of, you know, needing a community to help people reintegrate and to help show them a different way. It's, you know, ultimately it's the way things should be done. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And if anybody's got any questions for Chris, if anybody has anything they want to ask, then either put your hand up and we can unmute your mic, or if you post them in the chat, I can kind of read them out from there. So so there's a thanks very much. Greater Manchester could certainly do with it and would love the slides and presentation. We have a question coming up from Jill. I'm just going to unmute you, Jill, for a second. That should allow you, Jill, to unmute yourself.
It has. Thank you. I wouldn't be me if I didn't comment again on the outstanding work that Circles do. I mean, Chris, you and I have spoken at length many times, and I have interviewed both volunteers and core members, and it is outstanding. It is life-changing. You are reintegrating people who would normally be outliers back into the community. And again, I just want to thank you. As you're aware, you know, I have victim status myself. So being part of and seeing the work that you do, it's incredible. So again, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Jill, and thank you.
Thanks, Jill. As somebody else has put in, thank you, Chris. This is very important support you provide to a very stigmatised cohort of individuals, which I couldn't agree with more. Some of the work that you do is absolutely fantastic. And, you know, like Jill's just said, who else is around to support people with, you know, that type of offence or a history of that offence? Is there anything from anybody else? I realise we've gone over slightly, but with all the information, I didn't really want to pull Chris up. If there is anything, please feel free to raise your hands. If there's anything you want to post in the chat, please feel free. I think we seem to have that'd be it, Chris. So yeah, thank you very much. You speak with real passion, enthusiasm, and willingness to change. And I wish you all the best for the future. And thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure too, Jamie. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Well, it's just you and me, Jamie, is it?
Yeah, I'm just seeing. Yeah, it is just, mate. That was absolutely brilliant.
I think we can say to Carla without any
that
kind of
time
worry,
it worked.
That's the one.
That is the one.
Record it. That's the one.
But the work you do, it's like a lot of people, and I've only been in this industry for sort of 12, 18 months. People don't touch sex offenders. They just don't. It's almost like, oh, we don't work with sex offenders. We don't. But how is anybody meant to ever come back from dealing with what they've done?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you're writing a whole group of people off that, you know, the research suggests that if you get the community involved and you treat them humanistically, then there will be an improvement and there'll be a change.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, there wasn't time to say it, but you know, I often, and I didn't want to kind of say it because I knew it was being recorded and I don't want it on YouTube, but, you know, often when I'm doing kind of presentations face to face, you know, I do kind of end by saying, you know, and of course, actually, this is all just pissing in the wind until we deal with patriarchy. You know, it's kind of like, because the thing is that actually when you start to unpick it, you know, kind of the patriarchal nature of